Welcome everybody to another episode of Fins Nation. I'm your host Louis Sung, and today we're going to be finally setting up what everybody's been waiting for. The draft is almost here. It's right around the corner, so we're going to officially go ahead and do my mock draft. This is basically what I would do if Miami Dolphins were going to be standing pat the entire way. There are certain mock draft simulators that were out there. I tried to use a few of them. I tried to see what I could come up with. Some of the draft simulators that I used ended up coming up with some rather unrealistic opportunities for the Miami Dolphins, such as being able to still draft Darnell Washington at tight end with the 51st overall pick, which is just not going to happen under any circumstances. It would have to be a miracle upon miracles for that to happen. So I decided that I was not going to go ahead and use any simulator that allowed me to do that much. I tried to be as realistic as I possibly could, so now I'll go ahead and go over what I was able to come up with. But before we get into all that, just go ahead and mention that this show is brought to you by You Brake Wheel Fix. You Brake Wheel Fix is the complete automotive wheel solution. Ever parked too close to the sidewalk curb? You Brake Wheel Fix specializes in the repair of damaged wheels from bends, cracks, and curb rash. Or maybe your wheels are faded or peeling. You don't need to replace them, as You Brake Wheel Fix can refinish them to like new. Offering complete refinish options through powder coating, machining, and polishing, You Brake Wheel Fix is the answer to all of your wheel needs. And if you're just looking to give your ride a new look, You Brake Wheel Fix also offers many car customizing options such as new custom wheels and tires from your favorite brands, performance upgrades, window tinting, and suspension modifications. Located just south of Aventura, you can reach Mark and his staff at 305-748-0112 or online at youbrakewheelfix.com. They are really active on all social media platforms at YouBrakeWheelFix, so shoot them a DM on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter and get an estimate in just minutes. So don't delay, go to YouBrakeWheelFix and start customizing your ride to show off your Dolphins fandom today. This show is also brought to you by PrizePicks.com. PrizePicks.com is a revolutionary fantasy platform where you can now pick up to 6 different players across professional sports leagues. Whether that's the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, one of each is totally up to you to decide. Just choose whether your chosen player will get more or less than their projected stat. They give you free squares over there at PrizePicks for you to take advantage of, special Taco Tuesday promos, Flex Friday specials where you can get your money back if you lose, or even multiply the amount of money you can normally win. With offers like that, it's hard to justify not signing up if you're a fantasy fan. So use the promo code FIVE, that's F-I-V-E, and they will match up to $100 on your initial deposit when you sign up. Again, that's promo code FIVE, F-I-V-E. Go to PrizePicks.com, who we at 5 Reasons Sports are proud to have as our sponsors. Alright, so let's get into this whole mock draft thing. Now, granted, again, I had to do a lot of research on a lot of these prospects just to make sure that I was picking some good players, because again, I'm not a draft expert per se. I am not somebody who just knows everybody off the top of my head. I am not somebody who ends up going over hours upon hours upon hours of film just to be able to be sure for myself that this is the guy that I want over every other single prospect. What I do is I take a look at other prospects, I look at other scouting reports that have been made out there, talk to a lot of people that I respect, talk to a lot of people who have done all this work, and then I will decide for myself based on just some quick clips that I've seen of other players that they say they really like, and I try to make a match of what they will be able to do in the Miami Dolphins offense or defense, and I make my decisions based on that. So now with these 4 players that I've gone ahead and drafted, because I did not trade up or down, I went over several different draft simulators to try to make the best possible scenario that I could, and not only that, also a realistic one, because as I mentioned at the start of the show, the idea of getting Darnell Washington at 51 is absolutely not going to happen. So any draft simulator that gives you that option is automatically disqualified in my eyes. Now, that doesn't mean that a miracle can't happen and the Dolphins won't have that option. For all we know, maybe the Miami Dolphins are able to get the best tight end in the draft because some other teams have decided, you know what, we're good at tight end and we're happy and we don't really need an upgrade there. So I'm not saying it's impossible that it could happen. I'm just saying it's incredibly unlikely, and to pretend otherwise just seems naive. So I went ahead and I just said, let's try to pick the most realistic one that I can. So I went ahead and I went to Fanspeak. That is the classic one. That is the one that everybody was using since the dawn of time, I guess you could say. There was no trading up. There was no trading down. I did not upgrade or pay for the subscription service to make sure that I would have that option, because not only is it something that I don't want to pay for because I'm cheap, it's also because most of the trade options that the algorithm gives you are incredibly unrealistic, and most teams will not offer that kind of trade down or trade up option for you. So with that in mind, we're just going to go ahead and go over each player that I picked, all 4 players, one by one, and go into why I decided this was the move that I decided to make at this particular spot. First and foremost, here we go. So the second round pick, the 51st overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft, the Miami Dolphins select the Iowa tight end, Sam LaPorta. Now, this is a guy that I've briefly talked about before in the past, and I know that my friend Chad, who has been on Pulse of Fins Nation with me before, along with Ron and Alfredo Arteaga, he's popped in. He's had his say. He watches Iowa. He's from Iowa. He's a fan of Iowa. So he has had full experience in being able to watch LaPorta work. And even he has said that this kid can be something special. And a lot of his struggles in college, if you can even call them struggles per se, a lot of it just had to do with the fact that his supporting cast was not all that great. I've been told that his quarterback was not particularly impressive, and as everybody knows, if you have a subpar quarterback, it's very difficult for you to shine as a player. So here's Sam LaPorta. He played wide receiver and defensive back in high school before he went to Iowa and became one of the best tight ends in college football. He's had incredible numbers. In the 2022 season, he had 58 catches, 657 yards, only one touchdown, but per yards per reception, he had 11.32 yards. This is per the Draft Network, 11.328 yards per reception. That's incredible. That's an amazing number. And for the past 2 seasons, LaPorta apparently led the Hawkeyes in receiving yards and had nearly double the production of the next target up. Ironically enough, the guy in second place was another tight end. His name was Luke Leachy. I think that's how you say his name anyway. And just to give everybody a little bit of insight into what kind of a passing game the Iowa Hawkeyes had. Their leading passer was a gentleman by the name of Spencer Petras. He played in 12 games. He threw 281 passes, 157 of them were completed, for what is quite frankly a Tim Tebow-esque 55.9% completion percentage, which is something that any NFL quarterback would be laughed out of the stadium for having if you're supposed to be a starting quarterback. 1,725 yards passing, 6.1 yards per attempt. He threw 5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and a passer rating of 109.8. Now, I guess in NFL numbers, that would be pretty good as far as the QB rating. But again, look at this, 55.9%. Now, again, I'm not a college expert. Maybe in college, that's actually not too bad. But I don't think it is. I really don't. And if somebody wants to correct me, please feel free to say so. But to me, if you can complete only barely half of your percentage, that's not good to me. So there is something to be said about the fact that Sam LaPorta was struggling because he didn't have somebody good throwing the football to him. He basically had to fix the quarterback situation by himself, and yet he was always able to be a consistent target. Now, what makes him a good fit for the Dolphins? Aside from the fact that he's obviously very good with his hands, he's actually able to make good catches, he's able to run good routes, he's a weapon. Not only that, though, unlike the previous weapon that the Miami Dolphins had, Sam LaPorta is actually a competitive blocker. He's willing to block. He doesn't mind blocking. He's somebody who can practice at blocking. And so, considering what the Miami Dolphins offense is, and again, we just went out and made sure that we extended Durham Smythe, who is a blocking tight end primarily. You just went out and got Eric Saubert, who, yes, he has some capability as a weapon, but also he is also a good blocker. So having Sam LaPorta, who can actually do some blocking, but is also consistent, very consistent as a weapon, that finally gives the missing piece to that offense that says, here is the tight end that can finally do both things that they have been missing for so long. Now, granted, his size is not necessarily something that is wow-worthy. He doesn't have the 6'7" amazing frame of a Darnell Washington. He doesn't have the height of a 6'5" Mike Gesicki. He's 6'3", kind of reminiscent of Charles Clay back in those days because that was the kind of height that he had. But as far as everything else goes, he's pretty good. He's got good hands, good route running. He can work pretty much every area of the field. He can win after the catch. And again, he can block. He's not the best blocker in the world. He's not somebody along the lines of a Durham Smythe who literally his whole game is surrounded by blocking, but he is a competitive blocker, and given time, he will eventually get good at what he's doing to the point where we can say we can count on you for pretty much every situation. Once that is done, there's not a whole lot left for LaPorta to work on. He can basically be the starting tight end for the Miami Dolphins in the long term. We can eventually move on from Durham Smythe. We can eventually move on from Eric Saubert. So I really love the idea of betting up Sam LaPorta. He'll be available at 51. I know he will. And so With the Miami Dolphins picking him, they're basically adding that last piece of the puzzle to the offense that we were looking at and saying, you know what, this is the real weak spot. I understand the whole running back situation, and we will get into that, but the running back situation is pretty much set still with Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson. And if you want to add Salvon Ahmed to that mix because he's a good change of pace guy for Jeff Wilson or Raheem Mostert, you can go ahead and do that. But both Mostert and Wilson can run for 1,000 yards if given that opportunity. So let's just go ahead and move on to the next one. Now, with Miami's third round pick, that's the 84th overall pick in the NFL draft this year, I went ahead and I went back to the defensive side of the ball. And here's why I ended up doing this. So I was looking at some of the players that were available, and I saw that Jonathan Mingo was available. Now, the 3 yards per carry crew, which, by the way, if you want to, you can go to OnlyFins for only $3 a month on Discord. Some of the best Dolphins talk you'll find anywhere. If you haven't already joined up, you absolutely should. You're wasting your time hanging out on Twitter with a whole bunch of people who are just going to rage and holler. The 3 yards per carry crew on OnlyFins, they give you some awesome insider info that you can go ahead and just be on the know with all your friends. Now, here's the thing. I did see Jonathan Mingo, but I looked to the wide receiver position, and I saw that they went ahead and they just signed Chosen Anderson. They still have Tyreek Hill. They still have Jalen Waddle. They went ahead and they signed Braxton Berrios. Now Chosen Anderson is in on that mix. Cedric Wilson is still hanging around as of right now. So that may change. We'll see what happens with Cedric Wilson. They may decide to trade him. They may get another pick out of him for that. And if they do, then we will see what happens with that. But as of right now, I have to go ahead with the assumption that Miami has at least 6 different wide receivers that you can choose from at any given moment. Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, Cedric Wilson, Braxton Berrios. Now you got Chosen Anderson, and number 6 can be any combination of things. You want to say that it's Braylon Sanders, maybe he has the leg up still, or you can say it's Eric Ezukanma now, and maybe Chosen Anderson doesn't make the team, but even then, that's still 5, at least, that the Miami Dolphins have. So where does Jonathan Mingo fit on that list? Now, if you just want to try to upgrade, okay, I get it. Jonathan Mingo is a terrific weapon, and the 3 yards per carry crew have all said that they would love to have this guy on the team if it were possible. And who knows, maybe it will be possible. We'll see. Nevertheless, here we go. Why did I finally choose? I went ahead and I went onto the defensive side of the ball because I saw the running backs there too. I wasn't particularly interested in anything that was available. Nothing stood out to me, and I still think that Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson can get the job done. So with the 84th pick in the 2023 NFL Draft, I went ahead and had the Miami Dolphins select Henry Toatoa out of Alabama, a linebacker. So here's what I'm thinking with the whole linebacker situation. Obviously, the Miami Dolphins have gone ahead. They have invested in the linebacker position. They signed David Long Jr., and he's going to be able to provide some very good veteran help. We know that he's a very good player. We expected him to be signed to a much bigger contract than he ultimately did sign for. So obviously there's something there where he actually wants to be in Miami. Mind you, it's only a 2-year deal, but still, maybe the Miami Dolphins will sign him later if he stays healthy. If that is the case, then we can at least count on him for a little while. But there are other linebackers on this team that we can look at and say, you know what, we're not really sure if you're the long-term future. So who am I talking about with that? Obviously, it's Jerome Baker. Many people have had their mixed feelings about him. They've been up on him. They've been down on him. The thing I have with Jerome Baker is not that I never believed that he wasn't good. I believe he was being asked to do too much because out of all the linebackers on the entire roster, you had Jerome Baker, who's obviously your best guy at that position, for better or worse. And then you had Landon Roberts, who is a really good run stuffer, but aside from that, he can't really do much. Duke Riley, who is a good reserve, but I wouldn't call him a starting linebacker. And then you had Sam Eguavoen, who also is not particularly strong as a starting linebacker. He's a good special teamer. He's a good reserve, but he's not somebody that you're going to count on and say, you're going to be the headliner for my defense. So you have Jerome Baker basically doing everybody's job. Jerome Baker is at his best when he is pass rushing. That's what he does best. Now, he can cover. He can go after running backs and tight ends sometimes, but that's not what you want him doing most of the time. That's not his best skill. What you want him to do is to chase after quarterbacks because that is what he ends up doing the most, and that's what he ends up doing the best. We've seen that happen. So what does Henry Toatoa do? Henry Toatoa is essentially a middle linebacker. He would fill the role of an Landon Roberts, but to a much higher degree. Henry Toatoa was, even as a freshman, he was the best linebacker for the Alabama Crimson Tide for a while. He had considered Ohio State, ultimately chose Alabama, and he's been recognized nationally for the kind of stuff that he's done. He's smart, he's physical, he tackles consistently, and he's mobile. He's not slow. He's not in a Landon Roberts where he's only somebody who can go ahead and just go down and stuff a run. He can do much more than that. He can basically be the captain of a defense if you give him that option. And he can play in a lot of different kinds of defenses. So he can play in the slot, he can play on the sides, he can play in the middle. He's an all-around linebacker. The only thing, and this is per the Draft Network, because again, I have to do my research on these guys. So I just look at what other people have said, I kind of compare it and contrast it to other things, and these are the kinds of things that I come to a conclusion. With the Draft Network, one of the things that Toatoa needs to get better at is block deconstruction. So he tends to float around a little bit. He's not somebody who just keeps fighting. He hangs around. He kind of waits to see where he can make his play. That's something that can be taught out of him, though. There's a lot of good NFL coaches on this team that can look at this kid and say, listen, I know you have what it takes to get this job done. You can do this. All you have to do is just get more aggressive and start pushing a little bit harder, and you could become one of the best linebackers in the NFL. So that's why I went ahead and I decided to do Henry Toatoa with the second-round pick for the Dolphins. No, we didn't necessarily need more defense, but you know what? If you're going to go ahead and replace Jerome Baker next year, because if you're looking at Jerome Baker's contract, right? This is what the Miami Dolphins can do if they went ahead and they cut him. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it up here via Over the Cap. The whole Jerome Baker situation is something that Miami Dolphins fans have been arguing about for a little while now. They're not convinced that he's the long-term answer here. So if you're going to go ahead and do that, if the Miami Dolphins were to cut Jerome Baker, let's say they cut him in 2024 as a post-June 1st cut, if the Miami Dolphins cut Jerome Baker, they would save $11 million and they would only be on the hook for about 3.5 or so. That's an estimate. I try to round up when I can. So $11 million off the books, and then you're on the hook for about 3.5 of that if you're going to be cutting him as a June 1st cut in 2024, which, again, I don't really believe that Jerome Baker deserves that kind of treatment. I think that he's a lot better than anybody gives him credit for. Now, if you can potentially trade him, that'd be great. That'd be fine, because even if you do it pre-June 1st, you still save a lot of money on Jerome Baker. With Jerome Baker, if you do it pre-June 1st, then the Dolphins save about $10 million or so, and they're on the hook for about $5 million. So the difference is a little bit more skewed for the post-June 1st. But if you can trade him, and maybe you can get a 4th-round pick or a 5th-round pick for Jerome Baker, it might be worth it in 2024. They're obviously not going to do it in 2023, but by drafting Henry Toatoa, you basically get rid of the stress of the linebacker position. And the other players at that spot right there, I was not particularly impressed with. So that's why I did what I did there. Now, here's where it gets tricky. The Dolphins don't draft again until the 6th round. So that is pick number 178. At that point in the draft, you're just taking flyers. There's nothing that you're going to look at and say, this is a sure thing for the Miami Dolphins. So considering all the players that I saw available, once again, I was looking at the positions and I was just trying to find where could I get some good value for the team in the future. Maybe I could find some guys that were developmental but had the potential to possibly replace somebody in the future. Where can we find somebody who is good? And that's where I went ahead and I went with defensive lineman Carl Brooks out of Bowling Green. So here's the thing with Carl Brooks. He's a little bit of a hybrid. He's not somebody who has a set position. He's not somebody you can look at and say, that's a nose tackle, that's a defensive end, that's a defensive tackle. He does a little bit of everything. Okay, so he's a good pass rusher. He has some really good film, but he has some things that he needs to work on, just like any other 6th-rounder would. So the thing that there is to like about him is that he's very high motor. He's not somebody who's going to give up on a play. He's never going to be accused of being lazy or taking a play off, and that's something that the Miami Dolphins can work with. If you care, if you actually want to be one of the best, then you can eventually become one of the best. I firmly believe that. To some extent, anything can be done with enough effort. That's my personal opinion. You practice hard enough, you dedicate enough time to it, and you will eventually get really good at what you're doing. So somebody like a Carl Brooks, why do I pick a defensive lineman instead of something like a running back or a developmental guard or tackle? The reason is simply because, again, I have to go ahead and I have to try to look at value. Right now, the Miami Dolphins are in a position where they have some really good players at the defensive line, but we may not keep them all going into the future. For instance, what are the Miami Dolphins going to do with Emmanuel Ogbah? Are they going to be keeping him for the foreseeable future? I sincerely doubt it. So if they are going to go ahead and remove on from him, who are you going to replace him with? Could it be somebody like a Carl Brooks? Could you maybe replace Emmanuel Ogbah with somebody much cheaper, much younger? I'm not saying Carl Brooks is immediately going to step in and be the same kind of player as an Emmanuel Ogbah. Emmanuel Ogbah has made a name for himself to some extent. But the Miami Dolphins don't need Emmanuel Ogbah right now. He's very much a luxury. And just like with Jerome Baker, who I've already taken care of with the Henry Toatoa selection, the Miami Dolphins may or may not be hurting for money in the nearby future because of all the contracts that they've gone ahead and they've signed. If you were to get rid of Emmanuel Ogbah, either by cutting or by trading him, the Miami Dolphins are going to save about $14 million and they only be on the hook for about $4 million. So just between him and Baker alone, you've already saved about $23 million. $23 million that you can use for the future. And by the way, just based on everything that I'm seeing here, per over the cap, the Miami Dolphins would be about $15 million in the red in 2024. Now, this is, of course, assuming that no extensions are made. This is, of course, assuming no restructures are done. This is, of course, assuming that the salary cap doesn't jump up another $30 million like it seems to do every single year. But we can only base it on what we've seen so far. So you've already replaced Emmanuel Ogbah, and you've gone ahead and you've tried to replace Jerome Baker. I will miss those players. I like them in aqua and orange, but you can't afford everybody. So Henry Toatoa takes care of the Jerome Baker hole, and then maybe Carl Brooks takes care of the Emmanuel Ogbah hole. I personally think that if you're going to get rid of Emmanuel Ogbah, it's because you're probably going to try to pay Zach Sealer, who has proven to be a much more productive player at a much more consistent level, and he would be somebody that you really don't want to let go. He and Christian Wilkins are basically the Daryl Gardner and Tim Bowens of the modern era. So I would want to keep them both. Maybe Carl Brooks turns into somebody. We have some of the best defensive coaches in my opinion. And if we really need to, listen, we've got Jason Taylor we can bring in as a quote-unquote defensive consultant at any given moment. So who knows? We'll see. That's why I went ahead and I went with Carl Brooks. I just liked the value there, and I liked the possibility of just being able to keep that defensive line fresh. And finally, with the final pick for the Miami Dolphins, number 238 overall in the 7th round, ladies and gentlemen, I finally done it. I have addressed the running back situation. And I realize that this is going to have some serious Jared Dokes similarities in that I waited until the final round to finally pick a running back, so it's very unlikely that they're going to actually be some strong contributors right off the bat. But again, I say to you, that is okay, because we already have our starting running backs set in stone. And this is, of course, assuming, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that the whole Dalvin Cook thing does not come to pass. If Dalvin Cook becomes a Miami Dolphin during the draft or before it or after the fact because the Minnesota Vikings have decided we can't wait anymore, we're going to take whatever you offer, or they decided that they're just going to cut him all over again. If the Miami Dolphins get away with getting Dalvin Cook somehow, then this whole running back thing becomes moot. Nevertheless, going off the assumption that Dalvin Cook does not become a Miami Dolphin, I went ahead and I drafted ZaZavian Valdez out of Arizona State. So why did I draft this kid? Why did I wait so long to finally pick up a running back? Well, this is where I went ahead and I deferred to my 3 yards per carry cohorts. These guys know what they're talking about. I know that Alfredo Arteaga, Chris Kaufman in particular, Simon Clancy as well, they all put in a lot of work on a lot of prospects, and they all really seem to like this kid. And he's a very productive running back. In some ways, he's like Myles Gaskin in that, no, he doesn't have any particularly strong traits, but he does have a lot of other things going for him. His greatest weapon is his speed. He's got a long stride. He can outrun defenders. He's somebody that honestly would fit this running back style really well because he works in a zone blocking scheme. So he's a guy who's going to take the ball, make one cut, and he is gone. So that's perfect. The Miami Dolphins already function on that kind of a running scheme anyway. So he's a perfect fit. Now, is he going to break a whole lot of tackles? That's something that he'll have to work on. Ultimately, his value is based on what team he goes to. So going to the Miami Dolphins, that would be perfect. He's fast. He's explosive. The only thing is that he's not somebody who's going to break a whole lot of tackles. But that's okay because that's not what the Miami Dolphins are going for anyway. So that's my mock draft. Again, the Miami Dolphins don't have a lot to go on. Right now, it's just 4 picks. Maybe they'll get more out of it. Maybe they trade Emmanuel Ogbah on draft day. Maybe they trade Cedric Wilson on draft day. Maybe Chris Greer has something else completely different hidden under his hat. Maybe he trades up, maybe he trades down. I don't play that game because a lot of the situations are very unrealistic until they happen. And maybe a miracle happens. Maybe all these mock draft simulators that I went ahead and ignored because I didn't like the scenario, Maybe they do come true. Maybe Darnell Washington does become a Miami Dolphin. And all that stuff that I just said about Sam LaPorta, I'll throw it right out the window because Darnell Washington can do all that and then some. I don't think it's going to happen, but all in all, I'm happy with what I said. I'm happy with what I've done. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I will try to address it later on in future shows leading up to the draft. The 5 Reasons Sports Network obviously is going to have a lot of draft coverage coming up very soon, so make sure you're tuned in for that. And of course, that's going to be it for this show now that I've gone through the entire draft. If you have not already done so, make sure you go check out You Brake Wheel Fix if you have any issues with your wheels or if you just want to modify your car to be the best that it can be. If you want to make your car look like a real Dolphins fandom, you can go ahead and do that. They can help you out with customization. They can give you performance upgrades. They can tint your windows. And of course, they can fix your wheels, powder coating, machining, polishing. They can make your wheels look like new all over again. So again, call Mark and his staff at 305-748-0112 or online at youbrakewheelfix.com, or you can shoot them a DM on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter to get an estimate in just minutes. And of course, if you haven't already done so as well, go to prizepicks.com. They are the revolutionary fantasy platform where you can go ahead and make some serious money with all of the different promos that they give you. Use the promo code FIVE, that's FIVE, when you sign up, and they will match up to $100 on your initial deposit when you sign up. So basically, you deposit $100, they're going to give you $100 on their dime for free that you can play with before you even touch your money, and you can start winning some big time cash today. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you all next time for Fins Nation.